Hello and welcome to the Paranormal Romance track here at ConTinual. I'm your host, Gail Z. Martin and Morgan Brice, and we'll be talking tonight about creatures of the night, vampires, why we love them, and why they don't suck. So let's get the introductions here so we know who's on this wonderful panel. Jocelynn, start with you.
Hi, I'm Jocelynn Drake. I have been writing, well, actually I started writing vampires many years ago. I was first published in 2008 with the Dark Days series, and then more recently, I'm just about finished out with my brand new Lords of Discord series.
Awesome. Liv?
Hi, I'm Liv, and I think my first book was published in 2012, and that was a vampire story, though not particularly happy ending, but not a true romance. And I didn't really get heated up into writing vampires. That's a weird way of phrasing it, but whatever. Until Irene dared me to write another one, and yeah, haven't looked back.
Awesome. And Irene?
I am Irene Preston. I co-author the Hours of the Night season with Liv Rancourt. We've been published, I want to say, about the same amount of time. I wasn't writing at the time, and Liv said, hey, we were talking about co-writing. She said, hey, you want to try that thing? And I said, yeah. And she says, what should we write? And I was like, well, you had a really interesting vampire side character in one of your books I read, and I'd like to see more of that. So now we write vampires.
Well, and as Gail Z. Martin, I write epic fantasy, urban fantasy, steampunk, and more. And as Morgan Brice, I write urban fantasy, male paranormal romance. And of course, that's all kinds of things that go bump in the night, however you want to take that. I've loved vampires all my life. In fact, the very first story I wrote, and you can put that word in quotation marks, as a kid, I was 5 years old. I couldn't spell yet. I had to dictate it to my grandmother, and it was about a vampire because my very favorite TV show was Dark Shadows, and it really hasn't changed since then. So what is it about vampires that makes them sexy? That's kind of a modern twist, but not exactly. What is it? What about these bad boys that we love?
I don't know. They're so much fun because I think because they are natural bad boys. You know, they're the gimme bad boys. They could be tall, dark, brooding, and they go for your neck and they go for your blood, and it's so sexual to start with, you know. And then there's this element of, you know, they're so powerful and yet they have this control that you give up to. So I don't know. I love them. I just rambled.
No,
that's crazy that you said that you went straight to bad boys, because Liv and I actually write a vampire who is a former monk. So we kind of went the other way with that. But he's I actually write his love interest, and I think he's still super sexy. I think there's something about, there's something naturally tortured about vampires, about the fact that, you know, they can't go in the sun, about the fact that they have to do this, you know, what our vampire at least would call it, a horrendous thing to survive. So they're kind of naturally tortured and broody, and yeah, I don't know. I like vampires. I've read all kinds of vampires. I like all of them, from, you know, comedic vampires right on over to the really horrifying ones. I love Bram Stoker's Dracula, even so, and even that had a sexual element to it, even though that was more
Absolutely.
of a classic horror vampire.
How about you, Liv?
You know, I think they reflect the time, that they're the character type that can really be put to use in reflecting the time that the writer is in and the readers are in. I mean, I think for the Victorian era, there was a lot of sexual tension in Dracula. Although when we read it, we might not, it's not nearly, you know, Sookie Stackhouse. You know, and then when Anne Rice was writing, one of the big cultural struggles had to do with the AIDS virus and viral illnesses. Sorry, English is my second language tonight. Viral illnesses in general. And I don't know, I think the sort of 2000s vampire, Twilight and the Southern Vampire Mysteries and Anita Blake and those sorts of stories, it is about the power and the bad boy energy. So I think it's a very versatile character, and I spent a lot of years studying Gregorian chant and fantasizing out how cool it would be to meet someone who could actually teach me how. So instead I wrote Thaddeus DuPont, who knows more about chant than I ever will.
Very disciplined, Liv, very disciplined.
But you know, I did a retreat once at a monastery that kept all of the hours.
The hours, yeah.
And going into a darkened cathedral at 4 a.m. when you're not awake and you're in that place where the veil is thin and then it's dark and dimly lit, and there's this a cappella chanting going on and candle.
Yeah, that sounds fantastic.
It absolutely was, but I think I was getting stuff out of it that they really hadn't held the retreat to get.
Nothing's wasted.
Because I was sitting there thinking, you know, wow, this is a perfect place for a vampire. And I think I was the other more cerebral things. But I don't know how you could experience that without feeling otherworldly. I mean, the whole purpose of creating that is to make you feel like you've kind of stepped across the transom. And so, yeah, I totally get that. I think I have been sympathetic to vampires and seen them as the, you know, dark hero with that start with Dark Shadows. You know, Barnabas Collins was kind of the original tortured, angsty vampire who wanted to be human again and had a doomed love affair and all of those things. And I think
my husband played in a band with Barnabas Collins' son. Just FYI.
So,
Little trivia.
But,
Sorry,
you know, I sort of sank into my marrow because that's the way I've always seen them. And while we have had maybe more handsome on-screen vampires since then, there's still that tragic hero pull to them that just makes it very, very appealing. Which I guess, you know, leads you to, do vampires have to be tragic?
I don't know.
Some of yours are, you know, at least at first pass, don't seem as tragic as maybe they turn out to be later.
I don't think they have to be tragic, but I do think they kind of lend themselves. One of the things, kind of riffing off what Liv said before about Gail too, is about them just kind of, why do I keep losing video? About them kind of changing with the times is I think it's interesting how vampires have gone from this very more of a purely evil, even the sexualization of Dracula and everything, it was part of his evilness almost. So even though you had some sympathy for him, he was definitely an evil character. And over time, they've become much nuanced. And I think it's happened at the same time when, as a society, a lot of us are thinking about things in more nuanced terms. So we don't necessarily have the same connection to a strict religion that we used to, where things were black and white. There's a lot more just kind of nuance in what makes something evil and what makes a person a hero. So I think that's kind of a really interesting thing about vampires, is that they come out of this very evil tradition, and they have definitely the potential to be horrible, evil characters. But then you want to look for that redemption, and you start, I always think of it, and Liv, like I said, we have a monk, so we wound up with all of this weird religious aspect to our writing. That's, I promise it's not too heavy. I promise it's not. But you know, I think a lot of people, as we become more secular, are having this conversation in their own lives with themselves about what it means to be moral when you don't have a religion to tell you what morality is. What does it mean to be human? What is, you know, all of those things fit very well into a vampire. So we like our vampire.
Well, and I thought you really kind of turned some of that on its head with Sarah, because he just doesn't get Thad's hate.
No, oh, also we have the completely non-Christian character for our monk.
It just looks at him like, are you smoking something? Because that doesn't and I love it. It's so unexpected, because that'll go off on these guilt trips and Sarah's going, oh wait, when you get over it, I'll be here. It doesn't make any sense. You just realize that, right? I thought that was such a wonderful addition in those stories.
Yeah, no, Sarah is, he's agnostic, which is a reflection of my own beliefs. But he also, you know, he thinks a lot of things about Christianity are weird. And so he's really kind of a counterbalance to Thaddeus. And I enjoy that aspect of it, honestly.
And he was raised
a Hindu tradition, correct?
Yeah.
So it's not even it's not even like a lapsed Catholic or somebody who grew up in a heavily Catholic influenced culture. It's just not part of his DNA.
Yeah, it's a whole
right. Go ahead.
No, that was I was just like, yay, you're right.
No, and we do kind of go, I think Nocturne, the second major novel, kind of delves into that, because we find out that Sarah is not quite as human as he himself thinks he is. And so then, you know, I guess it was one thing for Thaddeus to kind of condemn himself as being doomed, but it was a different thing for him to look at someone he loved and condemn them. So he has to start facing again what he believes, and you know, what humanity is, what divinity is, whatever the opposite of divinity is, you know, what's that? So
I love immortal creatures.
It's a very light book, okay? It's just fun.
And Jocelynn, you've got your wonderful set of brothers, and they're all beautifully broken in so many different ways. And I think that's one of the things that really reeled me in on that series, is how different they are, and yet they're all coming from a common trauma, and how much beauty there is in them. So run with that, please.
Thank you so much. Thank you. It's funny because when I started writing the Lords of Discord, which are my Varric brothers, the four brothers, they are so vastly different from my first go at vampires. When I wrote them and was first published, 10 plus years ago at this point, I wrote the dark, scary, absolute power corrupts absolutely kind of vampires. And I mean, that's what I wanted to really dig into when I first got into vampires, was this idea that you've created this creature and the only system of checks and balances out there were other vampires. So it's like they're just kind of the violence and the evilness kind of built on itself, and then finding a hero and what kept that hero from becoming so dark. You know, what were the catches, what were the people that kind of helped them reel them in and cling to that sense of humanity in the end. And that's what I really loved when I was working on those books. When I switched over to the Lords of Discord, it was already built into kind of like their structure. The idea that we had these 4 brothers, they were very close, and their mother essentially got tuberculosis when she was young. She had a vampire lover who tried to save her, and unfortunately her mind was a little broken before she was turned, so that when she was officially turned, she kind of went insane. Wasn't like consistently insane, but it was kind of like, we have lapses, and when we have those lapses, we try to kill everybody. So the idea of that we love our mother so much, she became this initial bond for all of them to not go over that deep end, to watch out for each other against other vampires and against their own mother, but also do whatever they can to protect them. So it was for them, when I was working on that, it was the idea of the ultimate sacrifice, that duty and family always comes first. And then as their books go on, that idea of duty and obligation to family is tested again as they find people who might run contrary to the Varric family, and I love this man, but I can't really be with him because how is he ever going to fit into my family? And family always comes first. So I mean, they were a lot of fun to write.
And I've written vampires in almost all of my series. If you haven't met them yet in some of the series, they're coming. But my main vampire actually comes from one of the urban fantasies that isn't a romance on the Gail Z. Martin side of things, and that's Soren. And he's a nearly 600-year-old vampire who, for the last 500 years, has helped to run the Alliance, which is a coalition of mortals and immortals that save the world from supernatural threats. And since it was an urban fantasy series, I wanted to go against type, and he's not the love interest. He'll never be the love interest. He kind of sees the main character as more of a granddaughter, even though they look like they're about the same age. But in one of the books, we find out why he has sworn off ever taking another human lover again. And we meet the woman that he loved, who is now in an Alzheimer's unit at a nursing home. But when he comes to visit her, she can remember. And in her mind, because of his vampire mojo, she's who she was back then. And the staff comments on how much better she gets when her grandson visits her, and how she always wants to have her hair done for her young man. Except they're not talking about nearly the same things. Yeah. And it was intentionally meant to be heartbreaking, because that's why he says he's just never going to put himself through this again, because we're sort of like how you love your pet very, very, very much, but when you get into it, they're only going to be here for such a short time, and you're setting yourself up for it at the start.
Oh yeah. But
it's worth it until it happens. We're sort of like that to an immortal.
Yeah, yeah.
So he just says that I'm going to protect you now. I'm not going to, but he shows up in a lot of the Morgan Brice series because he is that protector who kind of stitches the whole thing together. And he kind of makes sure the other vampires, the bad ones, stay out of town. So it's been kind of fun to work with him that way. Now, we've mentioned some of the iconic series out there like Anne Rice and, Sookie Stackhouse and all of those. What were some of the influences for you, romance or not romance, and nobody ever just loves one vampire. We all have our stash of favorite vampires. So who are yours?
Go, Liv. I know you've got some.
Steph?
Let's see. I read Anne Rice a lot, Kim Harrison a lot, Anita Blake a lot. I just kind of I do flit here and there across all the different, tasting a little bit. I'm probably, when it comes to vampires, tend to be a little bit more on the urban fantasy side when it comes to reading than just like straight paranormal romance. Though I remember now, I did love Carolyn Sparks' riff on the vampires, as well as Lindsay Sands with the nanobot Atlantean vampires. I thought that was just an amazing new turn on vampires that I hadn't seen yet. They were just so much fun.
Liv and Irene?
I think, funny, at the risk of coming across as too heavy again, I have always read a lot of vampire stories. Those were sort of always on my reading list, but I would cite Charlaine Harris as an influence, because I did a Gregorian chant retreat, and on the Saturday night when I was really burned out and everybody was watching, I don't know, some video about monks somewhere, I sat by this big fireplace and read Dead Until Dark in like one sitting. And I finished it and I said, I want to do that. I want to do what she did. And that book in particular sort of shifted me from just being a reader to thinking about writing vampire stories. And I used to sort of lurk on her website, and she had a number of threads where she recommended books by different vampires. So I read a lot of different stuff. Fledgling by Octavia Butler. I can't even remember all the series. The one by Game of Thrones dude there.
George
R.R. Martin has a vampire story that I didn't finish, didn't like it, but you know, just I read a bunch, both romance and urban fantasy, and then sort of more traditional vampire stories. There.
How about you?
We're all on the same page here, huh? Because everything that Liv and Jocelynn just said, like I was like, oh, I haven't thought about that in a while. Oh yeah, that would. But also, like I said, I do like Bram Stoker's Dracula. I mean, I guess that's kind of the classic. And even Stephen King's Salem's Lot. I mean, that is a very straight horror vampire. But yeah, lots to be learned there. I'm a huge King fan anyway. And then I guess I was probably like around the Anne Rice time. I mean, was Anne Rice? Liv and I are probably just. I mean, if you didn't read Anne Rice when you were our age, you forget it. You know, you don't know anything about it. But also for me, like in film, I would go with like Lost Boys. So you know, it took vampires from being these very somber kind of creatures into kind of the modern era of vampire. So I really liked that. I liked seeing them in sort of other more I don't even know how to phrase that, just kind of like I said, coming into the modern era and appearing as you know, rock stars or whatever, as fashionable young people. So yeah, being all of a sudden being sexy and everything. Yeah.
I mean, I certainly loved all of those, all of the things you've mentioned. And I think one of my favorite parts in the Sookie Stackhouse books is when the Daughters of the Glorious Past or something invite Bill to talk to them. And they're expecting him to tell them all about how noble and glorious everything was during the Civil War. And Bill talks about blood and death and how he saw all of their ancestors die terribly. And you've got this whole room full of little old ladies with their mouths hanging open because that's really not what they were hoping for, which just makes you wonder how hard it would be. I mean, it's hard enough on social media to keep your mouth shut for so many arguments. I can't imagine being immortal and having lived through all this stuff and having to put up with the chatter of people who don't know. No wonder they go off and brood in a remote house somewhere. It's exhausting.
Well, I think one of the things that I really always liked about Anne Rice's books is that the older her vampires were, the crazier they were.
Mm-hmm.
Because they couldn't do that. They couldn't adapt, and they, you know, I thought that always rang really true, and other authors don't necessarily capture that, which is fine, if that's their thing, but that always struck me as particularly realistic.
That's one of the things Soren always, you know, says when somebody remarks, wait, your vampire boss uses text, your vampire boss has a cell phone, and his comment is that vampires who can't adapt don't last. Mm-hmm. You have to be very flexible in order to fit in and to keep moving, which I think probably presupposes that there are certain types of people who do better as a vampire than others.
So that's an interesting point.
Yeah. I would think a very inflexible person wouldn't do very well for very long, just with the world changing around them.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, every so often we hear somebody way up in traditional publishing usually pronouncing that the vampire novel is dead. Nobody wants to read vampires anymore. Vampires are gone. And everybody I know just rolls their eyes and goes, yeah, right, tell yourself that. But I think every wave kind of refreshes what the vampire mythos is. And you've touched on it a little bit, but if there's more you want to say, how do you switch it up in your books? What do you hold to that's kind of traditional? And where have you bent some of those rules? Jocelynn?
Monk. That works at the church, so there was that. I don't know. I think one of the things that whenever I go into a paranormal, and it drives Liv nuts probably, because I'm like, I'm always, how does that work? So it was one of the first things Sarah did. He was like, can you turn into a bat? What's true, what's not true? We don't know. So I think there's always questions, and that's how we get our world building is just, doing that kind of going, well, how would that really work? If, how would they live? If you can turn into a bat, I mean, what, do you become, what, do you think like a bat? I don't know. There's so many questions. Whenever anything comes up, there's so many questions in my mind.
And she absolutely will not let me just take off and do my own thing.
Like, but Liv, how does it work? Not our rules, how does it work? She's like, it's magic. No, it's got to have a rule. So yeah, I think just asking yourself how things would work in the modern age. One of the things I think is it must have been so much easier to be an immortal, say, even 50 years ago, but 100 years ago, because there weren't the same kinds of paper trails and databases that we have now. So how do you manage that these days? How do you maintain your wealth? How do you, when now we all have social security numbers and all of this stuff. So I just, I think, there's always some new problem with being a vampire, or whatever it is. How do you function in the modern world?
There's always a vampire hacker out there.
There always has to be now.
Find the vampires with social security numbers and new IDs. That's his whole job. He's a vampire hacker. That's we all know.
Vampire hacker. I know. They must be very in demand.
It's ITSEC, it's the Witness Protection Program for vampires. And I figure, if people can do, there are people who have always been able to hide money, whether it's in the Grand Cayman Islands or in Switzerland or whatever. So that has always been a thing. Somebody knows somebody who can do a thing. And if you have a little witchcraft thrown in, I would think that that would blur the trail a little bit, which I think Anne Rice did with her Mayfair Witches. Don't they run a financial organization that caters to the supernatural? Because you would notice if your client never died.
You would notice, yeah. That was probably 30 years ago, so I'm going to take your word on that. But yeah.
One of the things I played.
Sophisticated. They had a pretty sophisticated organization, if I remember, though.
Yeah. One of the things I played with Soren, because it was just going to be too constrictive for what I could do with plots going forward in the series, was this whole idea that a vampire can't cross into a church, that a vampire can't go into a church, or that a vampire is susceptible to silver. In my worlds, that doesn't work. Silver gives him a bit of a rash. It's much harsher on werewolves. He can go into a church. But what he can't do, the irony to Soren is that the only blood he cannot take is the Eucharist.
Huh.
So that's an interesting twist.
Yeah. So, and that factors into one of the stories. But that was kind of probably one of the biggest tweaks that I made in mine. And it's only going to come up under certain circumstances.
Yeah. Yeah. Cool though.
Yeah. So where do you see the whole vampire thing going forward? Because it is a trope that never dies. And it does keep reinventing itself. And I liked what Irene said earlier about the whole redemption arc piece of it. So where do we go from here?
Well, I feel like they're uniquely adapted to live in space. So, I mean, you know, it's very dark. They don't have to worry about the sun. You know, many other aspects. So, but where the blood, you know, I guess might be a problem. Where they get the blood in space.
There you go.
No one else has space vampires. It's just me.
That's your next series, hon.
You know, they'd be great on the long interstellar travels because
there you go.
Yeah.
See,
you just need
the vampires going to Mars first.
Mm-hmm. Vamps in space.
well, okay, see, now here's how it goes, because now I was thinking, well, they would survive well in space because there's no sun, right? So that they'll be able to, you know, not have to be asleep. But now I'm thinking maybe you just put a UV light on them for the whole journey and then have it go off when they get wherever they want to go and they'll pop awake. I mean, how does it work? Come on.
Hashtag plot bunny.
Well, and the problem,
I will say that's one thing that we gave up was Sarah determines that Thaddeus does not actually die. One of the first things he does when he's alone with him during the day is listen for his heartbeat. And so he determines that it's very slow, very faint, but it's there. He does not die, actually.
that's an interesting twist.
No, I have dead vampires during the day. Well, yeah, and that
wake him up.
That was always the incredibly exhausting thing to plot for when I was writing that series, because it's like not only did I have them drop dead, just as soon as the sun hits the sky, boom, dead wherever they are, gone. But I had them jumping on planes and traveling across the world and going places. So I'm calculating how long, what time do they have to leave in order to land in such and such location 8 hours away? And,
Did you look up all the time zones like we did? The sunset in time
of year, okay, the sun rises at this time in September in London. That means that they have to be on the ground and in a safe zone. And then I had to make up special coffins for travel in case they couldn't get to XYZ. And then I fixed
Okay, wait a minute. All right, so my pet peeve for writing vampires, that brings this up. My pet peeve is days.
Oh God.
Because in normal they split a day. They're awake from the end of one day to the start of the next day. So, when you're trying to keep track of time in your world, vampire days are very confusing.
Yeah.
So that's my pet peeve. That's my one big vampire pet peeve.
When I moved to the Lords of Discord, we got rid of the whole we're dead during the day thing. We just can't go outside. Made my life so much easier. But then I did run into this problem, like you're saying, that it's like, okay, it's daytime. I have my cute little hunky boyfriend here. He's going to go to bed with me in the morning, and I'm not going to see you the next day. I'm just going to see you later today. And I'm like,
yeah, it's weird. See,
every time I'm typing it out, and I'm like, readers will figure out.
Maybe if we don't point it out, they won't notice. Oops.
So
they get where I'm going. I'm the only one stressing about this.
No. I've plotted out too many vampire days, like on a timeline somewhere. It's a thing.
So I'm thinking about the future. To get back to Gail's question, and I think I did a blog post not too long ago about how authors should treat the current troubles in their work. And one of the articles I read, I think it was from the Washington Post or the New York Times, one of them, talked about how really good fiction, like it took 4 or 5, 6 years even after 9/11 to get real serious fiction grappling with those events. And I think I think there is clearly going to be real serious fiction working out ideas around our current situation, but it's not going to happen anytime soon. And it's interesting to me because, like I said earlier, the vampire is a character that can sort of be tweaked to suit whatever the times require. And so I don't know what ideas are going to, I don't even know, are we still going to be in 5 or 6 years? But hopefully, and I'm interested to see how a character type with that much flexibility can be put to work or put to use to sort of examine what we're going through now.
Well, if you think about it, vampires are kind of a plague-proof creature. They've lived through this before. This is not their first rodeo. Whether it was the flu pandemic or the Black Plague, they've been there. And so in some ways, they have an advantage in having that within memory where, for most of us, the most recent was 100 years ago, and nobody dealt with it then is around to go, oh, I remember what we did, except for vampires. So they're really a hidden asset, I think, in this kind of a situation.
It'll be interesting to see how what comes out of all of this.
This is true. Well, folks, believe it or not, we have gone through most of the hour. So I want to go around and ask everybody, what's the next thing you're working on and when can we find it? And then where people can find you on social media. So Jocelynn, how about you?
Okay, so the most recent book actually just came out last week. Yes, last week or whenever, very recently. It's called Embracing Winter. It's the 4th book in the Lords of Discord series. And I recently surprised readers with the fact that there will be one more. It's called Healing Aiden. This is the last book of the series, I swear. But it is scheduled to be out on October 9th. And I am pretty much on all social media as Jocelynn Drake. And you can find me also on my website at jocelyndrake.com.
Awesome. Oh, I'm so happy. I was hoping you would do something for Aiden, but I didn't know.
I got talked into it.
Irene?
What are we doing? Okay, I'm Irene Preston, almost everywhere. I'm on Facebook, Twitter, various other platforms. You can find me at irenepreston.com also, or Liv and I have a shared website at pressworkbooks.com. And we we are working on Benedictus. It's a slow one, but hopefully for next year. Right now we have a spin-off series. It's not vampires. It's a psychic detective ghost hunter kind of story. And the next book in that series, Harrowed, will be out in October.
Fantastic.
Yes,
Stuff to look forward to.
very excited about it. It's the first full-length-ish novel for these characters, and it's been really fun to work on. And like the other two, I'm pretty much all over social media as Liv Rancourt in various iterations. Facebook and Twitter primarily, but also Instagram, and I don't keep going. I probably have an account. I may not pay attention to it, but I probably have an account. And Irene and I also share Facebook, like a fan page on Facebook, After Hours with Liv and Irene. And that's where we'll do the occasional sneak preview kind of thing, or outtakes that didn't make the cut, or giveaways that we're involved with, or what parties, whatever. We are hanging out over there.
Awesome.
Get to that from either of our websites or usually our Facebook pages too. So
Awesome. And I'm my urban fantasy is under Gail Z. Martin. The big thing there is remember the Z, because there's another Gail Martin who writes inspirational fiction, and I write about vampires. So you don't want to get
Little bit.
different.
where is it?
And then the romance, the urban fantasy mail paranormal romance is Morgan Brice, and that both of those are the .coms. Pretty much everything is under those names. And my Facebook group for the romance is Worlds of Morgan Brice. And if you want to see the series that starts with Soren, that is my Deadly Curiosities series under the Gail Z. Martin name. But the next one coming out will be Legacy, in which it's another Deadly Curiosities novel. Soren will be in it. And we'll also have more of Dead Dante, who is the main character's ancestor, who was pirate, and he just, his ghost just keeps coming back and saving people. So it's pretty cool.
Yay, ghost.
Yay, ghost. Well, thank you guys so much for being here tonight. Really had fun with this. Vampires, what's not to love? And I'm your host, Gail Z. Martin, and I'll be back with more paranormal romance and lots of other fandom favorites here on ConTinual.